Che Guevara was a revolutionary, idealist, and militant icon. To some, he embodied the struggle for freedom. To others, he was a ruthless enforcer of authoritarianism. His unyielding pursuit of revolution brought suffering in Cuba, almost provoked nuclear war, and ended with death in a Bolivian jungle. Che was born on June 14, 1928, in Rosario, Argentina, to a middle-class family of Spanish-Irish descent. Despite his upbringing in relative privilege, Guevara's childhood was marked by struggles with chronic asthma, which shaped his personality and fueled his determination. His parents held progressive political views, and their home exposed young Che to discussions about leftist politics. This environment planted the seeds for his later political convictions. Che pursued a medical degree at the University of Buenos Aires, but it was during his travels across Latin America that his ideology began to shift profoundly. In 1952, he embarked on a motorcycle journey through countries like Chile, Peru, and Bolivia. The poverty, inequality, and exploitation he witnessed during this trip had a profound impact on him, reinforcing the idea that systemic change was needed to address social injustice. After returning from his travels, Che became more engaged with left-wing political movements and Marxist ideas. He read extensively, drawing inspiration from Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and other revolutionary theorists. His experiences convinced him that only armed struggle could liberate the working classes from exploitation. By 1954, his ideological transformation was complete when he witnessed the U.S.-backed coup in Guatemala that overthrew democratically elected President Jacobo Arbenz. This event solidified Guevara's belief in anti-imperialism and the need for revolutionary socialism, marking his full embrace of Marxism. In the mid-20th century, Cuba was a nation rife with revolution. The government of Fulgencio Batista, a military dictator backed by the United States, presided over a deeply divided society. While Havana thrived as a playground for tourists and businesses, rural Cubans lived in poverty. Corruption was rampant, and dissent was brutally repressed. It was against this backdrop that Fidel Castro, a young lawyer from a wealthy family, emerged as a political activist. After leading a failed uprising in 1953, the infamous assault on the Moncada barracks, Castro was imprisoned but later released under political amnesty. Exiled to Mexico, Castro began organizing a guerrilla force to overthrow Batista. It was in Mexico that Castro met Che. The two men quickly bonded over Marxist ideology and shared ambitions. Guevara admired Castro's charisma and vision, while Castro recognized in Guevara a disciplined and fearless fighter. Together, they formed the 26th of July movement, named after Castro's failed Moncada assault. In 1956, Castro, his brother Raúl, Che, and a small band of rebels sailed from Mexico to Cuba. Although their initial landing was disastrous, most of the fighters were killed or captured. The survivors, including Guevara and Castro, regrouped in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, launching a guerrilla war against Batista's forces. Over the next 2 years, Castro's forces gained momentum, with Che becoming one of the movement's key commanders. Known for his tactical brilliance and ruthless discipline, Che led numerous successful operations, including the capture of the city of Santa Clara, a decisive victory that signaled the collapse of Batista's regime. Che's ideology was clear: only violence and strict revolutionary justice could dismantle the old order. This belief would later manifest in the brutal purges he oversaw once the revolution triumphed. On January 1, 1959, Batista fled Cuba, and Castro's forces entered Havana. The Cuban Revolution had succeeded, but the real battle to reshape the country had just begun. Che became the head of the prison La Cabaña, where he orchestrated numerous executions of individuals labeled as counter-revolutionaries. These executions, carried out without proper legal process, were intended to consolidate the new government's control and eliminate dissent. Estimates of the number of people executed under Che's supervision vary, with some sources citing between 200 to 700 victims, and others suggesting even higher numbers throughout Cuba during that period. Trials were often expedited and lacked transparency, with predetermined outcomes. It was reported that Che met with prosecutors in advance to decide sentences, ensuring swift punishment. Many executions took place at night, and in some cases, they were broadcast or publicized to demonstrate the regime's strength. Che's role as a strict enforcer and his personal belief in the necessity of revolutionary violence earned him the nickname the Butcher of La Cabaña among detractors. His actions reflected his conviction that terror was a vital component in building revolutionary order, a stance he applied not only in Cuba but later in his attempts to incite revolutions abroad. This darker side of Che's legacy contrasts sharply with the romanticized image that persists in popular culture. While some see him as a symbol of rebellion and anti-imperialism, others highlight the authoritarian and violent methods he used to achieve his political goals. Che's zeal for revolutionary justice knew no bounds. Even young individuals and former allies were sentenced to death if deemed threats to the revolution. His justification? The revolution must be defended at all costs. His cold pragmatism not only solidified Castro's rule but also sowed fear throughout Cuba. After the Cuban Revolution, Che played a key role in shaping Cuba's relationship with the Soviet Union. In the early days, the Soviets were cautious, unsure whether Castro's government would embrace communism. However, Che's ideological alignment with Marxism-Leninism and his anti-imperialist rhetoric reassured Moscow that Cuba was aligned with their goals. By 1960, Che's involvement helped establish agreements between Cuba and the Soviet Union, including trade deals exchanging Cuban sugar for Soviet crude oil and a $100 million loan to support Cuba's economy. Che's travels to the Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc countries in 1960 further cemented ties, as he sought assistance to offset the economic impact of U.S. sanctions. These interactions laid the groundwork for deeper Soviet involvement in Cuba's development, marking the beginning of the island's Sovietization. However, the relationship was not without tension. Che's revolutionary zeal sometimes clashed with Soviet pragmatism. Although Che was instrumental in solidifying Cuba's economic and political relationship with the Soviet Union, the partnership grew tense as their goals diverged over time. Che's revolutionary zeal clashed with the Soviet Union's pragmatic approach, which prioritized geopolitical stability over spreading revolutions. Moscow aimed to maintain influence over Cuba without provoking direct conflict with the United States during the Cold War. In contrast, Che sought to ignite armed struggles across Latin America, Africa, and beyond, believing that revolution was the only way to dismantle imperialism worldwide. Che's frustration with Soviet policies became particularly evident following the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. When Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev agreed to remove nuclear missiles from Cuba in exchange for American concessions, Che felt betrayed. In interviews, he expressed bitterness over the Soviets' retreat, remarking that if he had control of the missiles, he would have launched them, revealing his willingness to escalate the conflict, even at the risk of nuclear war. Moreover, Che criticized the Soviet Union for abandoning revolutionary ideals in favor of state-controlled bureaucracy and diplomatic caution. While Castro adapted to the geopolitical realities of aligning with Moscow to ensure Cuba's survival, Che felt constrained by Soviet demands for moderation. His belief that revolution should be exported to other countries through armed struggle was at odds with the Soviet Union's preference for stability within its sphere of influence. The relationship between Fidel Castro and Che began to deteriorate after the Cuban Revolution as their ideological paths diverged. While initially aligned in their revolutionary ambitions, tensions surfaced due to Guevara's unyielding idealism and Castro's need to balance Cuba's survival within the Cold War political framework. By 1965, Che chose to leave Cuba and pursue revolutionary activities abroad, starting in the Congo and later in Bolivia. His farewell letter to Castro revealed both admiration and regret, hinting at underlying tensions. He expressed pride in their shared achievements but acknowledged that his uncompromising revolutionary spirit no longer fit within the framework of Castro's leadership. After leaving Cuba, Che arrived in Bolivia in 1966. His goal was to ignite a regional uprising that would spread socialism across Latin America, following his belief in continental revolutions. However, the campaign was doomed from the beginning. Che and his small band of 50 fighters established a guerrilla camp in the dense Bolivian mountains. His plan depended on two key elements: support from Bolivia's Communist Party and the mobilization of local peasants. However, both failed. Mario Monge, the leader of the Bolivian Communist Party, refused to collaborate, feeling that Che's operation lacked realism and could provoke brutal reprisals. Che also underestimated the challenges of gaining trust among the rural population, many of whom remained loyal to the Bolivian government or were indifferent to the revolutionary cause. Soon food supplies dwindled, and illnesses spread among the fighters. Bolivian authorities soon became aware of Che's presence, and the small group of fighters found themselves trapped in hostile terrain. The CIA deployed agents to assist the Bolivian military, including Cuban exile Felix Rodriguez, who played a pivotal role in Che's capture. On October 8, 1967, Bolivian special forces ambushed Che and his remaining fighters near La Higuera. He was captured wounded but alive. After his capture, Che was interrogated by Rodriguez. The Bolivian government, with CIA encouragement, feared that a public trial would turn Guevara into a martyr, inspiring further uprisings. On October 9, 1967, Che was executed by Bolivian soldiers. His final words were, "Shoot, you coward, you are only going to kill a man." Che's death only added to his mythic status. While his guerrilla campaign in Bolivia failed, his image as a revolutionary martyr endured. Immortalized in the famous portrait by Alberto Corta and in the minds of leftist movements around the world. Che Guevara's legacy is profoundly complex and polarizing, embodying both the ideals of revolutionary struggle and the brutal realities of authoritarian governance. To some, Che represents a symbol of resistance against imperialism and oppression. His relentless pursuit of social justice and anti-imperialist ideals continues to inspire activists. However, Che's legacy is also marred by the darker aspects of his revolutionary tactics. His involvement in mass executions at La Cabaña prison and his endorsement of violence as a tool for political change have drawn sharp criticism. Many see him as an emblem of the authoritarian measures that defined Cuba's early post-revolutionary government, where dissent was silenced, and human rights abuses were justified under the banner of revolutionary justice. Furthermore, Che's uncompromising ideology, especially his desire to spread revolution at any cost, led to tensions with both the Soviet Union and Fidel Castro, ultimately isolating him politically. His death in Bolivia at the hands of CIA-assisted forces marks both a tragic end to his revolutionary ambitions and a stark reminder of the limits of radical idealism within a geopolitical landscape dominated by the Cold War. In the end, Che Guevara remains an enigma, part visionary, part enforcer. Whether revered as a hero or condemned as a violent revolutionary, his story serves as a powerful example of how ideals can both inspire and destroy, depending on the methods used to achieve them.